I want to start real quickly with some definitions, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. We've all been here for a few days. We've all heard what Internet of Things are. I want to give these guys as much time as I can because I think they really have some interesting content. One thing to mention is when we talk about IoT, we're doing different things with it. So asset health is one thing, and I think you're going to hear a good case study from Shell on how they're using an IoT type solution, probably weren't calling that when they put it in, to improve asset uptime, which improves their operating performance. And then we've got Dow that is got a logistics visibility solution, and I would say it's also sort of an environmental compliance solution. So we've got a second kind of feel to it. Safety, risk, and management. And then we've got AGCO, which is really tackling sort of the risk management part of the supply chain. So we've got 3 different approaches to visibility. We've got different types of IoT data. But then I think one of the more interesting parts of our discussion is when we get to the end and talk about their vision for where they want to take this, I think you'll hear some interesting things. I just want to quickly define a supply chain control tower. Supply chain control tower is a central hub with required technology, organization, and processes to capture and use supply chain data to improve, to provide enhanced visibility for short and long-term supply chain decision making. So this is who's speaking today. We have Jan Thiessen, Director of Strategy and Methods, Global Purchasing and Materials Management at AGCO. We've got Jeff Tazelier, Global Leader, Auto ID, RFD, GPS, and Telemetry. I think it's now the Supply Chain Operations Excellence.
The Supply Chain Visibility Center of Excellence.
Supply Chain, so that title has changed. And we've got Tom Maroney, and I hope we got your title right there, Tom. It's VP Global Deepwater and Wells R&D. So with that, let's get right into it. I thought I'd give a few minutes for folks just to introduce their companies. So Jan?
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jan Thiessen. I'm the Global Director for Strategy and Methods in the Global Purchasing team of AGCO. I'm pretty sure most of you have never heard about AGCO. It's a Fortune 300 company, and we are in the agricultural machinery business, mainly building tractors and combines and also other harvesting equipment. Company is just 25 years old, grew by acquisitions globally, based out of Atlanta, Georgia. It's about a $10 billion company, and we have basically 5 strong brands right now, which is Challenger, a former Caterpillar brand, which is Fendt, our European or German powerhouse, which is more or less a premium brand within the company. GSI, which is something completely different, and this is what we are using to differentiate ourselves from our competitors. It's grain storage, feeding systems, etc. And then we have 2 more brands, which is Massey Ferguson. Some of you maybe know the red tractors with the yellow wheels. Now it's more gray, but in the past it was yellow. Maybe the oldest tractor brand on this planet. And finally Valtra, which is a Scandinavian tractor brand, very strong also in South America. So we have global presence, 15 plants around the world, approximately 20,000 employees, and yeah, we are spending quite some time and money currently on increasing the visibility of our supply chain, as 70% of our products are coming from our supply base. It's very similar to the automotive industry. So the success of our company is heavily depending on our supply base, so that we really need to invest in these relationships.
And Jan, I know you guys are also an IoT company, so maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the first page you saw a lot of steel and iron, so we are a very traditional old company with old brands, steel and iron, so-called old economy, but the market is changing. So what our customers expect from us basically is that we are more and more getting connected. A tractor is nothing else than a truck or now a car. It's something like a data mine. We are collecting a lot of data while using tractors and combines. And the new approach is this connected farming or precision farming, where we not only try to connect the different devices with the hub, but also now integrate different vendors, crop vendors, fertilizing companies, and even maybe the end customers who are buying all that stuff from the farms. So the new trend in the agricultural business is connected farming, precision farming. And I attended an automotive conference last week in Germany, and I know that the automotive companies usually think that they are ahead of the rest. But if it comes to self-driving machinery, self-driving cars, connectivity, I guess the agricultural industry is now already ahead of what you know from the automotive companies.
So really, when you buy farm machinery, part of that message has always been about yield. But when you start to talk about sort of mapping your fields, and it really becomes a yield solution you're selling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all about, at the farms, it's all about productivity. A farm today is nothing else than just a corporation. People want to make money, people have to reduce costs, and it's all about yield and running a successful operations. And we currently see that many of these farmers are investing also in technology that wasn't there 5 years ago. So for us, the market has dramatically changed. We are even now selling drones because many of our customers now using drones to understand the crop, to better understand where there are issues with the crop, and really to start targeted initiatives.
Thank you, Jan. We're going to move over to Dow, and Jeff is going to walk us through Dow a little bit.
Good morning, and glad to see a few faces here after the SeaWorld excursion last night. So a quick overview of Dow Chemical, and I think most of you are familiar with us. The numbers in the slide are a little dated. We just closed our fourth quarter and year end with another great year. When we look across the businesses within Dow, it's a very diverse organization. So from a supply chain standpoint and supporting these organizations, many different solutions and requirements from our ag chemicals and seeds business, which may have a package the size of a small pill package, up to a rail car and a bulk marine vessel across the various business entities. Within our Supply Chain Center of Excellence, we support all of these businesses. We sit in between our supply chain leadership in each business, our IS organization who are supporting the various solutions, as well as our logistics function, which is tasked with the day-to-day operation of moving products around. And so our organization in the Center of Excellence is looking at what are those innovative solutions, more of an outside-in approach to supply chain and leveraging best practices from other industries, working with our customers in joint collaboration and moving transformational technologies forward. The one caveat of this slide is it will change drastically over the next 18 to 24 months, which will provide opportunities within our supply chain organization, as well as challenges.
Thank you, Jeff. And we'll do an introduction to Shell Oil as well.
Great. Thank you, Steve. And good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, fresh from the Netherlands as of yesterday evening, but I'm glad the logistics worked out. So just a few comments on Shell. Obviously, I think probably all of us are familiar with the brand and the retail service stations, the yellow pectin. Shell is one of a few of the major integrated oil companies. Depending on the metric, we're one of the top, in the top three, with the other folks that we compete against in that space, obviously being ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, and Total. In terms of, just in terms of some statistics, right, the company produces over 3 million barrels of oil equivalent on a daily basis, which represents roughly 2% of global supply. We have a retail fuel network of roughly 44,000 service stations through which we sell transport fuels to over 10 million customers a day. In our LNG business, liquefied natural gas, we deliver roughly 30 million tons per annum. We're active in over 70 countries and roughly 90,000 employees. I think if you had a bumper sticker that would describe Shell, it is about technological innovation and major project deliveries. So as I said, we are a major integrated oil company, so that means it's the combination of upstream operations, which is all about the safe exploration, production, and retirement of assets. And then it's the downstream businesses where those products are, that raw product is converted into a variety of fuels that is sold to a landscape of customers. The picture here depicts just one of our upstream integrated production systems. And this is where we begin to think about the challenges that we face in optimizing those assets on a daily basis. The deep water is the line of business that I am responsible for from a technology standpoint. And the deep water business obviously is major capital intensive. So again, it is all about uptime, maximizing throughput, that entire chain from subsurface all the way through sales point into our downstream operations.
Great, thank you. And then the question I posed of all three gentlemen is whether they could talk a little bit about the scope of their supply chain visibility project that is under discussion today.
Yeah, to understand this better from an Echo perspective, I told you that Echo is a pretty new company, 25 years old. In the past, Echo has been led very decentralized. So we had different brands, and the owners of the company were running the company more a little bit like an investment company, which created a few challenges for us in the purchasing organization. So there was no communication at all between the different entities, between the different teams. We had the same suppliers, but nearly no visibility, no transparency on the performance. So everything was based on technology and sales, and purchasing was more or less a priority 3 or 4 in the organization. So we brought in a new leadership team in 2011, and we decided let's transform this organization more and more into a real purchasing team, into a real global purchasing organization, leveraging volumes, leveraging know-how. And while we did that, we of course also attacked different areas where we felt not comfortable with. This was mainly the area of supplier management and supplier development, and part of that initiative of course is also the area of risk management. We had a few cases in the past, earthquakes, floodings, etc., where we really suffered from. So in 2012 there was an earthquake in northern Italy, which resulted in, I would say, 2,000 tractors without wheels and tires. So we even had to rent space to put all the work in progress. So we made this supply chain risk management part of our strategic initiatives in that transformation process. And when we decided to do that, we said, don't let us make the same mistake many automotive companies did 5, 6, 7 years ago when they had this crisis and when they all went to whatever kind of provider to build up a so-called risk management. I was in automotive for 10 years, and I was part of this group making this mistake. So we at that time decided, hey, the economy is going well, the company is doing well, let's really start with the fundamentals. And our strategy basically is, and not only in this area, but in general, before we think about implementing tools that help you to create transparency or visibility, let's do a few things first. Let's build a foundation. So we developed an approach, and that was our scope basically. First of all, let's clean our house. Let's make sure that we are not creating risk within our organization because we do not talk with each other, or we don't know what others are doing. So we basically started a transformation process where we developed this global purchasing organization with clear roles and responsibilities, and we also made it very clear to everyone in the organization that if you are a buyer, a purchasing leader, your job is not only to deliver cost savings, your job is to minimize risk, to make sure that we're not ending up in another situation like Northern Italy or others. Then we of course needed to understand our supply base. We have right now around 5,000 suppliers in our supplier list. Way too many suppliers for a company that is basically producing two major products, tractors and combines, but that's also a legacy from the past. After we did this foundational work, we decided, let's think about systems. How can we automate this process? How can we make life easier for the people in the organization? How can we use external knowledge to understand what's going on in the market, so that finally we ended up with a system in place, or different systems in place that now help us to really control our supply base, to understand are there any risks within the supply chain, financial risks, geopolitical risks, environmental risks, compliance risks, and others that help our commodity leaders, our purchasing leaders, really to make the right decisions based on performance, based on risk avoidance.
Thank you very much. And we'll take it to Dow now.
Great. So Dow started this journey of supply chain visibility over 10 years ago. And as you see from that first slide, it was largely driven by security as the priority. And so we've built out a very robust, for our TIH or toxic inhalation hazard products, supply chain visibility solutions for rail cars as well as our ocean cargo visibility. And there's some additional slides on those as we move forward. Approximately 6 years ago, Dow embarked on an ERP uplift, and as part of that, spent a good portion of the last several years upgrading SAP to a common platform globally. As part of that initiative, and coming out of that initiative, it was quickly determined that we didn't have the visibility outside of our fence line that we required. So we would often get from our business leaders phone calls from customers saying, where's my stuff? It was supposed to be here yesterday and it's somewhere in transit. Well, after a day of emails and phone calls with our carriers and multiple carrier partners from a multimodal standpoint, it was very clear that we needed to take action and fill and get visibility into those gaps. And so we've built a multi-generation plan. I think yesterday the common theme was, this is a journey. The technologies exist, as you see in those first two bullets. The challenge we have is how much data is enough. And we hear, yeah, we want real-time data. We're in the process of a road visibility solution today. The number one requirement was road visibility. Well, if I turn on GPS tracking across 48,000 shipments a month, that's going to overwhelm our logistics and business partners. So how do we take the opportunities that we're seeing and that have been built in the process and automation world and apply those into supply chain? And so part of this multi-generation visibility plan is adopting those similar principles over into supply chain. And so the bottom bullets, we've embarked and we're continuing to expand across the various modes. And rail visibility, we've overlaid some additional analytics capabilities from a dynamic on-time delivery and overlaying weather patterns, looking at and implemented a marine pack cargo visibility platform so we can see in transit where that product is. Today, those are largely, at least the marine pack cargo solution is largely based still on B2B communication and EDI. But we have the roadmap to get to real time, and you'll see some technologies there. As part of this underlying strategy, we see moving down into more real-time solutions. So one of the largest challenges we have is the accuracy of that data and the reliance on our logistics partners to provide that data accurately. So continuing to move down, ultimately building that control tower, and we've experienced and saw a number of different solutions. And yesterday we saw the work that our team had done in Oyster Creek and some of the opportunities there to leverage their designs. And then ultimately moving to more supply chain automation and where can we take some of these routine activities throughout the supply chain and automate those through software and dynamic triggers on the edge. One thing I do want to note, when we look at supply chain visibility, it's more than just logistics. So the long-term strategy is how do we pull in supplier collaboration and risk management, looking at event management and how do we more quickly react or predict events and use those opportunities such as an explosion in a port in China to grab market share and move to a more strategic business opportunity rather than just a cost center for our corporation. And then also moving down into that demand signaling through real-time technologies and embedding those into smart and intelligent products at the edge.
Thank you. And finally, we're going to get to Shell here, I think.
Yeah, okay. So the scope of our control tower solution is in the deep water line of business. Again, one of our major upstream lines of business. What we're looking at here on the slide is our Gulf of Mexico theater of operations. So for deep water, we've got 4 large operational theaters around the globe. In the Americas, in the U.S., it's the Gulf of Mexico. Down in Brazil, off of Rio, the western coast of Africa, Nigeria, Lagos, and then in Asia, it's in Malaysia. But now just zooming into the Gulf of Mexico, just a couple of statistics to describe, again, the scope of the operational intensity that goes on there. So we've got 7 floating, 2 fixed structures. So if we go back to that slide that was up previously, right, that picture was just one of those assets, right? So we've got 9, 7 floating, 2 fixed that we operate. That means Shell personnel are at the hands of the helm of those assets. There are 3 other assets that we have an interest in, but our personnel don't operate, all right? So those are non-operated ventures. So in total, a dozen assets, multi-billion-dollar investments, 7 drilling rigs in operations. So these are offshore drilling rigs. 7, that's probably down a little bit for obvious reasons. In Brazil, we've got 2 floating production systems. Connected to those host structures are approximately 300 to 350 wells that are producing over 600,000 barrels of oil equivalent. So that would include gas, right, just converted to oil. On any given day, there's roughly 2,000 to 2,500 Shell staff and contractors offshore, 35 offshore support vessels, and 10 helicopters in operation. So, a fairly large logistics materials management operation on top of the operational dimension of running 300 to 350 wells and then all of the processing equipment on those floating production systems, those host structures. So, Steve, the scope of our visibility was, again, looking at the deep water, extremely capital intensive. How can we further improve the ROI? So we set out on this journey thinking about some practices, procedures that are fairly well rooted in operations, right? Control, the safe operation of equipment. We wanted to shift that further into our engineering sector. so that we could further optimize these assets. So we thought about what engineers do on a daily basis. We thought about all of the activities, the engineering calculations, the models that get run to look at that integrated production system from the subsurface, the reservoirs, connection to the wells, all the way then back up to all the processing equipment. How can we ensure that on any given day, at any given second, that that equipment is being fully utilized at maximum efficiency levels? Obviously, equipment's going to wear down. There are going to be issues with wells potentially standing up. And so we saw an opportunity through analytics, through automation, where we could step up and standardize a lot of those analytics through the use of the computers, through the use of concepts of Internet of Things, and bring all that information much more forward in real time, the analytics forward in real time, and prevent anomalies from happening, throwing equipment offline or taking a well down and causing large pieces of that production system to be offline for hours or days or weeks until we can get in and do the proper remediation activities. So that was the thrust of our visibility tower. It's a large center in New Orleans where all of our assets in the Americas, so Gulf of Mexico and Brazil, are brought together and optimized in real time on a daily basis.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I've already heard a little bit of a common theme, which is both Dow and Shell doing some thinking about what operators need to see in order to do their job. So I think we may have answered this at least partially when we were talking about the journey, but I'll throw it out there again. And maybe it's just a very quick answer on your part, and we go on to the next question. But the question was, why did you feel the need for a visibility solution? And I think it's been partially answered already. So, yeah, Jan?
Yeah, just a few comments on that. If you really want to make your supply chain visible, you really need to understand what are the potential risks you are facing. And I mentioned earlier, 70% of our products are coming from suppliers from all around the world. So we have pretty complex supply chains. We are having just-in-time manufacturing. In some areas, we even have just-in-sequence, like the automotive people. So we need to do something to really understand the performance of our supply base and potential risks. And when we continued with our approach, when we were in the phase to select different providers, we spent quite some time internally with our friends in manufacturing, engineering, quality, to really understand what kind of risks are we facing and what kind of risks do we have to manage. So for us, it was important that people again understand risk management is not just buying a tool or asking suppliers to be more transparent. It is really a mindset change, and that's one of the reasons why we involved our cross-functional partners during the phase of risk identification, and we did a few workshops. We did a few sessions with these people, so that at the end of the day, also people outside the supply chain organization understood that if we want to manage risk proactively in our company, they need to be part of it. I know I'm repeating myself, but again, it doesn't make sense to pay money for tools, to pay money for a network, and we do that now. We have strong partners, and I guess we come to that a little bit later. But before we spent money on that, we wanted to make very sure that everybody runs into the same direction, that everybody is pulling the same strings to make this approach successful.
Thank you. And Jeff? Oh, I guess you had another slide there. Yeah, right. So, yeah.
Okay, then I will spend a little bit more time now on the technology. So the direction we have put in place almost 2 years ago was risk management is something you need to do, or supply chain risk management is something you need to do with strong partners. We are an agricultural company. We understand our suppliers. We can measure the performance of our suppliers, and we do measure the performance of our suppliers to help us to make the right decisions. But if it comes to other kinds of risks, geopolitical risks, environmental risks, supply chain risks, we are maybe not the experts. So we decided 2 years ago, basically, that we need to do something on the technology side, and we need to buy technology, and we need to buy content. So what we did basically is we screened the market. We did many RFIs to understand what's on the market right now, and we teamed up in 2016-14 with a company from Germany which is called Risk Methods, and they are experts in the area of risk management. And what we're doing with Risk Methods here is we have our supplier database uploaded in their system, and we spent quite some time on cleaning up the database first, which was even more difficult than ramping up the system. And with that database, we are currently monitoring all our 5,000 suppliers in terms of compliance risk, geopolitical risk, environmental risks, and whatever is out there on the market right now, to better understand, is there something coming up? Do we face challenges in the area of supplier insolvencies, financial issues with the supply base? We have teamed up with one strong partner, which is Risk Methods here. But we also have said, if you want to really understand your risk exposure, you need to connect to more sources. So what we have done basically to make this happen, we have implemented a global web-based supplier management system, which you see on the left side, where you see this demo corp. This is our Echo web-based system, where we track supplier performance, where we run manage our master data and everything related to the supplier. But all the sources we now have connected to, like Risk Methods, like Duns and Bradstreet for the financial part of the risk management, and some insurance companies, we are pulling this data out of their system into our system, so that our people, buyers and leaders, just have to go into one system to get the full picture, the full visibility on our supply chain on this particular supplier. This is from internal aspects like performance management, so we track quality, we track on-time delivery, we track commercial compliance, to make sure that we really understand, do we have the right suppliers, or do we need to start some kind of supplier development initiative? And on the same page, you will also see we call it risk scores, financial scoring, so that we really have an understanding about this supplier in all aspects. And what you see in the middle, basically, it's a smaller picture there, is our supplier network. It's now the first time in our history that we know the material flow. Where is the supplier located, and how is the material flow, for example, from China to Europe, or from China to the US? And with this, we also can monitor different ports and logistics hubs, so that if there is an issue going on in one of the logistics hubs in China or in Europe or in the US, we know it early. We're screening, with this solution, we are screening more than 10 billion web pages. We are connected to different kinds of databases through Risk Methods. So they are connected to compliance companies like EcoVadis, which is very much focused on compliance and environmental stuff, to insurance companies that usually have a quite good understanding about risks on this planet. So basically, it's not only about monitoring a supplier, it's more about monitoring the supply chain and the material flow from point A to point B, to better understand, is there something coming up, yes or no. And this is used by our buyers now to make decisions, and we are now putting algorithms in place to better understand to connect internal performance, quality logistics with external performance, so that in the future our predictive analysis will be much better than it is right now. So if there's a correlation between quality and maybe financial stress, we will early see if there's a supplier in a difficult situation or if something will come up in the future.
So Jan, there's one thing I want to press on. I'm going to describe the solution, and I hope I describe it correctly, and then I'm going to ask for a little bit of an explanation. So you've mapped your supply chain. You've mapped your most important suppliers. You've mapped how this flows into your factories, what ports it flows through. And then the risk methods thing is looking at 10 million sources of data. So let's say you've got a supplier in Brazil, and they go bankrupt. You want to know it now instead of at the end of the month. So I guess before we get into that, because I know that's a real example, but how does risk methods do it? Do you put in the word bankruptcy on each of these 10 million pages? Do you put it in Portuguese? Do you put it in French? I mean, how do you make sense of web scraping 10 million sites?
Yeah, I guess you took the example insolvency, which is the most difficult part of the entire risk management environment. To really understand if a supplier is in financial trouble, it is difficult right now. It was difficult in the past, and it will be very difficult in the future, because here we really have to rely on external partners, on the accuracy of their balance sheets, of their reporting. This is always pretty difficult to predict if there is a financial issue coming up. But if we talk about other risks, like let's say geopolitical risks or even strikes, and we had some cases in Brazil in the last couple of months, the company risk methods, they have created an algorithm that is screening this 10 billion web pages a day. They are connected to whatever kind of warning systems in the background, and basically. And we had that with a strike in Brazil. Within 60 minutes, we knew that there was a strike in the Sao Paulo area in the ports, and we got it through an alert system. So there are alerts coming to us. We have a, let's call it, control tower in our headquarters. So we're getting these kind of alerts, and then we are activating our teams to work on solutions. And this is what basically part of my team. We consider ourselves as a control tower, but we also consider ourselves as a consulting team and management team to resolve these issues. The good thing here is what we do right now, we cannot do ourselves. We do not have the IT expertise. We do not have the content management expertise. So that's one of the reasons why we need to have a strong partner. And the information is out there. It's not only the web. As I mentioned earlier, there are many agencies on these companies that are tracking whatever kind of risk and whatever kind of developments. And the art of risk management really is to bring this information together and to make sure that the alert function is running well so that you get the information early.
Okay, thank you. And we got a little bit out of order, so let's go to Dow. We've already talked a little bit about why visibility, so let's talk about the kind of the volume of sensor data you're generating, and so yeah, let's take a stab
Sure,
at that.
but before I go into this one, I wanted to come back. You had asked why supply chain visibility, and I would echo the traditional risks, event management in supply chain, reducing costs, and the various levers that we can engage and pull to do that, improving service. But another piece I would say is the Amazon effect. I don't know how many of you are in supply chain, but I would say at least once a week I get a business leader coming to me and say, well, Amazon can do this on a pair of socks, and they can give us all of this visibility and all of this technology. Why can't we do it when we're shipping a 38,000 gallon tank of pick your favorite chemical? And so the expectations there from the consumer and retail side are backing in to the chemical industry. And so we fundamentally know we're not there yet. We also know we have to get there very quickly. The variability and the risks continue to increase their pace. And so we need to be more agile and more flexible in our supply chain to get these products to our customers. And once again, I come back to making that transition from a cost organization tasked with how do we get it there the cheapest to a strategic organization. And you look at the large retailers and their supply chains, and that's their some of their core capabilities. And so rather than supply chain being an afterthought, actually getting a seat at the table and helping to drive those strategic discussions. So there's a fundamental change that takes place there in the organization to do that. So what kind of sensor data? And this is just a sampling. Fortunately, in the U.S., we have a very robust RFID system within the North American Railroad. And so on the 20,000 plus Dow cars, and this changes a little bit based on our current footprint and some of the activity we've done, but we're pulling in those 20,000 car location messages or CLM messages into a dashboard, pulling them through our rail visibility system, attaching various data elements. So what is not just here's a car mark and its location, but also the contextual information. What customer is it going? What's the delivery date or anticipated delivery date? Who is the carrier of that particular car? And so we can start to run the analytics on performance of specific routes. We can look at dwell times in certain switching yards. We can overlay weather. And so these are just a couple of snapshots of the various dashboards that our rail team has available. In addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, on our toxic inhalation fleet, we have GPS tags with various sensors on them. So based on whether a car is going through a high-threat urban area, we'll increase the ping rate on that so we have more granular visibility. If a hatch goes up in a high-threat urban area, we can take the appropriate action. If a hatch goes up at a customer, we know it's been delivered. So there's some additional capabilities there as we move from a security mindset of where's my stuff to how do we utilize this for supply chain efficiency and automation. So just one example here of rail cars, but I think it gives a flavor of the capabilities. And we're on the GPS side of it, we're looking at what are additional sensors we can include on these rail cars. So is a handbrake on or off, which can lead to degradation and issues. Looking at bearing heat, so on the actual rail car itself, which can lead to derailment. So there's a lot of additional sensor capabilities once you have the backhaul technology there to get that data back into your systems and the analytics then to run from a maintenance and repair standpoint as well. So,
yeah, no, this is great. And we had Jan say they're looking at 10 billion web pages. What are we talking about in terms of data generation for you? Is this half a terabyte a day? Is it a terabyte a week? Maybe I shouldn't have asked this without checking with you first, but do you have any idea?
I don't on this one. So. Yeah. It really depends on where those rail cars are. I would say largely we're managing this in a hosted solution, so software as a service outside. So we're not bringing this within our own data center and managing that data internal. Once again, relying on our partners and walking through the security aspects and all of those things as a chemical company will do, but not pulling all of that data in. So letting and utilizing the vendor from they have the sensor capabilities, they manage those devices, things as simple as battery maintenance and how many pings we actually need to get and creating those algorithms. I don't need to know a rail car is sitting there. If it hasn't moved in 12 hours, I don't need 800 data points to tell me it didn't go anywhere. So these are the kind of the data management where we work with our partners. We know what data we need. We know when we want to see it in motion. We know when we want granular data. So, you know, we try to remove the how much data are we collecting. We want the business information. I'm not as worried about the data.
Right. And one way to deal with big data is just make it somebody else's problem.
That's very true.
And Tom, let's talk a little bit about what Shell is doing as far as sensor data and all of that. So
Right. Okay, Steve. So let's start by taking a look at the solution, at least diagrammatically, how we've architected the solution that underpins this control tower for our deepwater operations covering the Americas theater. Again, the objective here was to extend traditional operational control room monitoring into the engineering sector, bringing forward all of the sophisticated analytics, operationalizing all of that in a very much in a continuous real-time manner, right? So we wanted to move away from having a system that was highly people-dependent and waiting for someone to turn on their computer, download data, put it into the latest model, run calculations. We began to look at all this, get very routine, standardized sets of analytics that we saw the potential of putting that into high-performance computing and driving that analytics and removing the personnel. Leaving the personnel then available to do the diagnostic interpretation of the analysis, and that's really where we get the value out of the personnel, right? That was another driver of this. So again, if we look at the slide here, diagrammatically how the system works, we've got a large number of instruments outfitted with sensor data, somewhere around 16 to 17,000 pieces of equipment that we're monitoring on a daily basis. We bring all of that into a fairly sophisticated alarm analytics engine. It's up here referenced as ECM, or Equipment Condition Monitor. And in the bottom there, you see one of the analytics architectural diagrams showing the data map to a series of calculations. So again, just some numbers. 870 million data points are consumed by the system a day, right? So different things are interrogated at different rates, and I really enjoyed the comment Jeff made. If we know something's idle, well, I don't need to, interrogate that second by second or, subsets of seconds. I know it's idle. But there are things that I do need that level of intensity. Leak detection, asset integrity, all right? But now when I get into looking for flow assurance issues and hydrates, the cadence of those issues is on a much different rhythm. And so again, the 870 million data points that we consume on a daily basis have all been defined so that the interrogation is driven by the information that we need to act on, very much so. We run something like 430,000 calculations, or analyses every day. Each analysis could have anywhere from 30 to 150 calculations, again, depending on the level of sophistication that the particular analysis calls for. So that's how the sensor network is set up, how we consume data, or the volume of data that we consume. What happens at that point is then we surface, again, these anomalies in that integrated production system, be it a subsurface issue where we might not be providing sufficient water injection to maintain pressure in the reservoir, if it's a well issue where a completion may be sanding up, or the delta P, the difference in pressure between the reservoir and inside the well may be too great, and we could be pulling much too hard on the well, risking failure of the completion design. So again, we're looking at the subsurface, we're looking at the wells, and then we're looking at all the topsides equipment. Surfacing when performance is outside of a targeted operating envelope. Again, going back to all of the models that have been set up for, if the well's at this stage of its life, and it's and the reservoir pressure is X, we know that it should be operating at this level, and or if it's a compressor, or if it's a separator. We've got all of the equipment defined within certain tolerance levels, operating conditions, and then we're looking for deviations outside of a known window, looking for trends before actually we get the deviation. All of that information then gets presented, if you move all the way to the far right of that screen on the bottom, into this control tower. We brand it the bridge. So our deep water control towers are called the bridge. These are large collaboration centers where we have operational personnel sitting alongside of a set of multidisciplinary engineers, again, looking at and monitoring this massive deep water operation in the Gulf of Mexico down in Brazil. And so it's sort of, I apologize, probably poorly represented there, but over on the far right, the bottom, you see one of the major alert consoles that are on display in the Bridge Center in New Orleans. So people, management, senior management can walk into that facility, and in many respects it would be walking on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, where you could get sort of an instant feel of what's going on in our deep water operations. What are the major issues that are occurring at a well level, at a reservoir level, at an equipment level? Where do we have major threats in the system? Do we then have the right suppliers lined up to do the requisite remediations? We could be doing a lot more in that space. Certainly I think that's where we could drive some of this in the future. But in terms of how the system operates today, this is how we've gone about architecting the system. One of the knock-on benefits is we've been able to really get much more efficient in the utilization of our personnel. So one of the analogies we like to point to, is sort of in the medical profession, nurses, generalists and specialists. Well, when you walk in with an issue or you do your routine checkup, a neurosurgeon is not conducting that analysis. They're not taking your pressure. And what we found in many cases was people with deep subject matter expert in, again, looking at how a certain reservoir was doing some very rudimentary analyses. We've been able to really optimize the use of personnel across our entire fleet of operations.
Yeah.
So,
no, that's fabulous. Thank you. Let's see what our next question is here. Yeah, I just want to dig a little bit deeper into the solutions, how you actually use them, sort of the key features, what makes them tick,
You can imagine if there's a tool in place that is screening 10 billion web pages a day connected to different kind of sources and databases from the World Bank and United Nations and insurance companies, that there are quite a bit of alerts coming in every day. So that's a reason why we also in our organization created the role of a risk manager, and he's actually here in the room, Jake. We are bundling these risk alerts coming from our different sources, mainly from Risk Methods, our main partner. And based on their risk alerts, we are basically starting standard protocols we have defined to manage these cases. One thing that we have to understand, and you could see that on that previous slide because there was a pictogram of a human being. Risk management, even if you start to automate all this stuff, risk management is and will be always based on human beings as well. So we talked a lot about Internet of Things the last 2 days and also today. In this case, one of the things is also still the human being. So most of the risk cases I have seen in my life are not only coming from whatever kind of database. it is coming from the employees, because they usually have very strong relationships with their suppliers. They usually know what's going on. If you have supplier development people in your organization, they are usually very well connected to the quality people at the suppliers, and sometimes there's even something like a friendship where you get some information. So we are pulling everything together in our systems, information we are getting from the partners, and even information we are getting from our employees. What you see here on the screen is one of the standard risk alerts we are getting. This is showing a fire we had this in summer last year. One of our key suppliers had a fire, and this affected 3 or 4 of our plants. It was part of the hydraulic system. We knew about the fire, I guess, 45 minutes after it has started. Usually the company owners don't call you or don't call the major suppliers when something happens like this. So we knew it because it was published on a small German local newspaper already 30 minutes after the fire broke out, and 45 minutes later we had it on our desk. So what we did in this case, we nominated one person in our global purchasing organization, who's of course was located in Marktoberdorf in Germany. He got all the authority to manage this case. He got in the car, drove to this place, met with the owners, and then it took him almost 4 to 5 months, and he's still working on it to manage this case. But at least it shows you how important it is to get these kind of alerts, because the earlier you can react, the smaller the damage will be. And our advantage was also advantage with our competitors here. We had a person on site very quickly, and a person who established a relationship with the company owners, who also offered help, so that we had this issue, yes, but it did not cause a financial problem for the company. It did not cause a delivery problem for the company. The only thing we had to do is we had to change a little bit the sequence of our tractor manufacturing in Europe, but that was basically the only damage. And again, it is important that you have these alerts, but even more important is how to deal with these alerts. And if you do not have standard protocols in place, clear roles and responsibilities in the organization, then it doesn't make sense to receive these alerts.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Great. So this is an example of our, this is a real-time tracking technology for marine pack cargo. So if the little silver device down in the center is a cellular-based GPS tracking device. It contains a number of different sensors on this particular technology. So this was implemented for a security tracking program for a toxic inhalation hazard product that moved between California, in China, as well as various locations throughout. So Hawaii was a very large customer. The state of Hawaii was a large customer of this. And so ultimately it gave us that real-time visibility into the movement of the goods. As part of this, it was an event largely driven by event management. And as Jan said, there was a global team with the authority to take action upon this. And so various temperature tracking technology. So when you look at, this was cellular based, it did tie into the AIS message on the vessels. So we were able to get real-time visibility in a dynamic ETA. We would get time-fenced or geo-fenced alerts, so when it would be received into the port of Honolulu, as an example, we were able to get an update. We would also have the ability to have our freight forwarder updated, who would take care of that load once it was brought into the port. One example, and I think I have it on here, I'm not sure if that's the exact alert, but we had a 16G shock alert for a container coming into the port of Honolulu. And 16 Gs is a fairly large shock. And so what ended up happening was the port operator dropped a container off of the vessel, and it bounced on the tarmac. And so we were able to alert the freight forwarder, as this was a toxic inhalation product, that take precaution in addition to your typical personal protective equipment. You will want more to take additional safety precautions. So it allowed us to respond and react properly to this. We also now leverage this and have the ability to update route times for long sea voyages, as well as from a security standpoint, there's light sensors, so we can see when a particular container has been opened. So once again, in a port for customs clearance, it's not uncommon for a container to be opened. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, we have questions for that vessel operator if a particular shipment is tampered with. So a lot of capabilities, and Jan made a great point. It's getting the people in the right places to react or to take the right actions based on these alerts. And we've seen in the past from GPS tracking technologies on another asset set where we put the technology in place. It worked very, very well. We were able to right-size that fleet, and then no one looked at the data again once we right-sized the fleet. And so it's how do you build the organization around these technologies, not just putting it in place and forgetting it.
Thank you. And Tom?
Okay, great. So I really enjoyed Jan's your comments around it's certainly easy to raise alerts and surface alerts and alarms, but then what? What do you do about them? So having clarity around roles and responsibilities and required actions was something we absolutely wanted to address in this solution that we implemented in our deepwater line of business. So if I may, with the slide up here, just take the group through a couple of definitions, how we've defined things inside of Shell for this solution, and then talk about what it looks like in practice. So as I've been mentioning this morning, the solution was predicated on extending very traditional procedures and practices in a control room type of environment, operational control and monitoring, into the engineering sector. And again, that's what you see, down at the bottom left, where you see the cadence of work activities, right? And so in that epicenter there is the monitoring, operational control, right? Things that occur within the day, seconds, hours. And then as you move out, now you start talking about analyses, reaction times that are more on the order of days and weeks. These are the analytics, the diagnostics, the interpretation activities that largely get done by engineering personnel. And this is where our solution is based. Again, extending traditional control room procedures and practices into that next sector. Ultimately, we can talk about activities that go on in terms of optimizing, planning, development activities that go on out in the field. But as we thought through that solution and thought through the cadence of work as it occurred over a time frame with certain roles and responsibilities, one of the things we wanted to be clear about was language, so that we were all speaking the same words. So alarms are different from alerts, events are different from alerts, and services is something else. So let me walk you through that. An alarm, again, is something that is an operational notification. Again, that's where the very tried and true operational control situation. It requires immediate attention. It's urgent. It requires intervention. Typically, we're talking about the safe operation of equipment, so exceeding threshold levels, et cetera. That's an alarm. An alert is an engineering notification. So those are the anomalies that get surfaced through all of the calculations and analytics I talked about in our bridge solution, in our control tower visibility solution. So it's a parameter that is trending outside of a desired operating. So it's developing condition, it's a threatening condition, but it's something that requires interpretation and diagnostics, right? It is not something that requires the immediate attention. The safety of personnel or equipment is not at risk. But what is at risk is financial returns, that we will lose throughput, we will lose operating efficiencies if we don't deal with these issues in a timely manner. An event is either a single or a combination of several alerts that indicate a certain type of a production anomaly. So this could be, as I was describing earlier, something related at the reservoir level, insufficient water injection that will ultimately impact recovery efficiencies or production volumes down the road, days, weeks, months. It could be a well production anomaly, or it could be a piece of equipment either on the seafloor or on our top sides. And then a service. So a service is when we decide that that anomaly is something that needs required action. And so now we get into the clarity of roles and responsibilities. And so each service has a standard operating procedure. Again, trying to extend language and terminology that was very familiar in our controls operational maintenance business into the engineering sector. So again, when we looked at all of the work that gets executed, there are things that we could certainly do if we wanted to drive the kinds of efficiency that were possible through the system. We would standardize the response mechanisms so that it wasn't dependent on what someone thought the right thing to do to deal with a hydrate was based on the training classes that they did or the people within the company that they happened to know. So we made all of that collaboration, all of the response mechanisms, what additional models needed to be potentially run, standardized, so it gets called up in the system. So once you say I have this type of event and I've connected it to this service that I want executed, well then it has to get done. And then the system from a traceability standpoint requires all steps to be followed through, all the way through the tracking of closing it out and what value did we capture or what value did we avoid potentially threatening. So this is how we have approached the solution to make sure that it just wasn't about analytics, it just wasn't about surfacing alerts, but it was also about clear roles and responsibility and standardizing the actions to remediate those threats.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Oh, we got some builds here. Here we go. Let's talk about benefits. We've talked about it a little bit, but you know, if we could go into it a little bit more. And let's start with AGCO, even though we don't have an AGCO slide. Let's start with you.
Yeah, there was a reason why I didn't provide a slide, because if it comes to supply chain risk management, of course you can waste your time and building up lots of business cases and explain the organization how important it is, or you just do it. I think if you are in the 21st century in a modern supply chain organization, if you again understand that 70% of your success is coming from your suppliers and their sub-suppliers, is a very natural thing to spend some time on this topic and to also spend some money on this topic. We have learned our lessons. We had some events in the previous years where we definitely paid some money because we were not prepared. We were not prepared in terms of transparency and risk identification, and we were not prepared in terms of managing these risk events. So there were cases that we used also to sell our approach, our solution. We also tried to understand, can we do an ROI analysis here? Can we come up with a fancy business case? At the end of the day, at least in this area, it is just putting some hypothetical numbers together. And we decided, come on, let's skip it, let's go ahead, and let's show the first successes. And we had this very nice success with this example I just showed you with the company Heideck with a fire. Here we had early identification. Here we had a fantastic standard protocol in place, and we had people in place that were managing the case so that at the end of the day, we did not see any financial losses, and with that we had basically our business case in place.
Yeah, it's really tough to put an ROI on risk management because you have an event that's unlikely to occur, but if it does, it can be catastrophic. And so it's easy for management to think, well, it's just unlikely that that's going to happen. But they don't think about all the things that could happen, and something is going to happen.
And I guess that was also the good thing for us was we started very proactively. So you saw the picture earlier where we invited our cross-functional partners already very early in the process, and this also helped us a little bit because they got scared. They figured out, it's not only about buying, it's not only about teaming up with suppliers, and then the world is great. It's really about there is some potential risks out there. And it really helped us a little bit to scare the people. So we and sometimes it helps to scare people because then suddenly they change from opponents to proponents. And I guess that was in that area maybe a smart move that we did, that we made it a company topic and not just the guys from purchasing deal with it.
Yeah. So we're going to move on from AGCO to Dow, and we're going to hear Jeff's perspective on this. Yeah.
So there's underlying, and we had to come up with the ROI use cases around logistics visibility. And so there's many different levers, as I mentioned earlier, that once we have this visibility, we can pull. Unfortunately, we can't share them, but I'll give you a tactical example. This was 4 months or 3 months after we had implemented or started the implementation of the solution. So we had a handful of our dray partners as well as our carriers on board the platform at this point, and we received a call from the freight forwarder that the Maersk Jubilee had a fire and was essentially floating in the Atlantic Ocean, basically not moving. And so typically what would happen is we would work through, we would go back in, we would work with our freight forwarder, with our dray carriers, in this instance it was also with the railroad, and then ultimately with the port and the ocean carrier. So it would take several days to be able to track down what containers were impacted and even what was the volume of containers on a particular vessel. With the solution, we were able to log in, and literally within 5 minutes, we had a list of the containers that were on that vessel. We didn't know how long that vessel would be inoperable. And so we were able to, with our business teams, then proactively reach out to the customers and take the appropriate actions, reallocate, look at, how do we get sources of supply if they're getting close to running down and shutting down production in a given facility. And so rather than that uncomfortable call of where's my stuff, we were able to proactively reach out. We knew what products, we knew what orders, and what the status of that particular shipment was, and then could work with the customer in a proactive manner to resolve the situation, which was a step change in the way we typically would have operated in the past. It would have taken us days. We would have had customers calling, were you impacted? And from a personnel, I think that's a great point. We were able to reduce the noise with our customers, with our carriers, with our partners to go and be more productive. And so I think that's an important piece that this does allow you to focus on those issues versus always being in a fire drill hypothetically.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, you've tried to move beyond just taking costs out of a supply chain. Again, the ROI around customer satisfaction is something that a lot of companies struggle with doing, but there's no doubt that it results in market share and value to the corporation.
Absolutely, and I don't think packaging and performance plastics is one of our largest businesses. Diego doesn't throw out comments all that often, and he was one of the presidents that came to me and said, Jeff, Amazon can do this. PepsiCo and Lay's knows where every bag of chips is on the store shelf. Come on, guys, let's get this thing going. So It's a different conversation when you enable these capabilities.
Yeah. And Tom, I don't know if we have a slide for you or not.
No.
Oh, I've got one more. So
One
just
more
another
slide. Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
Tropical Storm Bill, which came on this summer. We were able, with our rail visibility network, we're able to overlay the floodplain and the point of impact for this particular storm. It ended up not being as bad as we anticipated, but 36 hours before the storm hit land, we were able to determine what rail cars were in the region and were in the floodplain. And then our rail logistics and our North America rail team were able to, once again, take the proactive measures to deal with the situation. Now, you can't take a rail car off of the tracks and move it, out of that floodplain, but at least we have an identification of what is impacted. We can get the right information out to our partners and carriers to see what can we proactively do. And in the Gulf Coast region, there's many different sources of supply, so we can manage that once we have that insight.
And we're going to move to Tom and Shell. Oh, wait a second. Well, yeah.
We didn't. I was unable to provide a slide here on the value discussion. I'll say a few words. It's a very sensitive topic for us. It's sensitive in the way that we don't like to speak externally about it. We do believe that this visibility control tower solution is a differentiator for us. Is a truly key enabling capability that is producing significant returns, adding to the bottom line in terms of ROI. What I can say, and I think I've hinted at this in terms of how we've been able to bring forward all of the analytics in a much more efficient, effective manner. We do track things like deferred production volumes, uptimes on all of our equipment. We have been able to see noticeable changes in those metrics with the startup of this capability. In terms of the investment that we made, we don't even like to describe that, but roughly on the order of tens of millions of dollars was what the investment in the capability. So the analytics engine, all of the work to architect it, connect everything up, the physical facility itself, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of how many times we've delivered a return on that investment, it's depending on what you're looking at, 5x to 10x. So it's a true force multiplier across our business, and whether we're talking about production volumes, whether we're talking about recovery efficiencies out of the reservoir, whether we're talking about the more efficient delivery of a myriad of supplies, chemical injection delivery through subsea umbilicals, all of these things have seen improvements in our operation, and this notion of traceability that I described earlier, the standard operating procedures, executing the service operating procedure following the determination that we've got an event. We track that all the way through, including value. So we track, how much production was saved or how much chemical was avoided delivering downhole, et cetera. So
right.
Yeah.
So this is one area where you can put value on it, right? I mean, asset uptime means and better production means money.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah.
I mean, not surprisingly, those are the cheapest barrels we produce, right? The capital investment has already been made.
Yeah.
The operating costs are getting spent on a daily basis. More barrels through the system that should be produced. Those are the cheapest barrels we can deliver ultimately through to the end customer.
Yeah. No, 5 to 10x your investment. That's fabulous. And so we were going to move on. We were going to talk a little bit about if other companies here in the audience were thinking about tackling visibility, what should they think about? So sort of the hard-learned lessons of some of the folks up here.
I will keep it short. I mean, implementing something like a risk management approach is not really just buying a tool. I mentioned that earlier. It is a change management project. It's very simple, and you need to run it like a change project. You need to convince people to follow. You need to convince people that now and in the future their work is slightly different than what they have done in the past. Yeah? Usually in purchasing organizations, buyers are focused on cost down. They believe they are the strongest negotiators on this planet, but they never have risk on their mind, at least not in the past. So the lessons learned here for us were very, very simple. Make sure that you create some kind of an awareness. Make sure that everyone in the organization, not only the people who report to you or are part of your organization, understand that this topic is high priority. Make sure that you work on your data so that the data you are feeding into the system is accurate. So we spent at least 6 to 8 months with some people and a lot of money to clean up our supplier master data to really also understand what are our suppliers, where are they located, what is their physical address. I mean, that was a very nice experience when you work with a tool like Risk Methods and you present them your master data, and that's based on coordinates, and suddenly you find one of your suppliers in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean because the master data is not correct. Then you know that there is a problem. Yeah. And finally, what we did, we invested even more money on the training than we invested in the tools. Because we wanted to make very clear into the organization that everybody is part of this approach and not a tool, it's an approach, and that everybody has to deliver and everybody has to make sure that whenever there's a decision to be made, sourcing decision, supplier decision, that this is not only based on costs or price, it's based on more factors, which also includes the risk environment.
Thank you. And we'll see if we have a slide for Dow here. No, we don't, but let's go ahead and have Jeff answer this as well.
Yeah, so Jan hit on a key piece, is the data quality. So there's data all over, and our number one pushback when we put these solutions forward is we already have the data. We have it in our master data, we have it in our ERP systems, and so the opportunity is, can we access it and can we make better business decisions? So the quality of the data is always a challenge. When we talk supply chain data, much of this data is outside of our fence line. Mm-hmm. It does come in eventually, or at least key pieces of it come in from a financial transaction standpoint. But there's a lot more granularity we need when we operate a supply chain. And so it's how do we work with our carriers on the data quality? How do we work on the timeliness of that data entry, especially on the business-to-business communication piece? And then on the real time, it's getting in aligning to what is usable data versus just collecting it to collect it. The other piece, and Jan hit on this as well, is the change management. Within Dow, we've built an organization to implement these solutions, as well as we know the organization will change, especially as we look end to end. So what are those trade-off decisions that you can make in the event of a port shutdown? What can we do, and who makes those decisions? Is it the logistics function? Is it the business supply chain? Is it some combination? And Steve, I loved your slide on what is a control tower. So one of the biggest challenges is, where do you enable that decision making to happen? So by definition, the control tower is a central location, but there's many geographical differences in how those decisions are made. And then for Dow, we layer in a business, which also has that supply chain segmentation and how we prioritize, and no one likes to hear that, but how we prioritize those shipments in an event. And so how do we enable that, and how do we push that decision making to the right level within the organization?
Tom?
Yeah, great comments already made by Jan and Jeff on this question, Steve. But I'll just run through. From my perspective, the journey that we Shell went on in implementing our solution. Things to keep in mind. Absolutely, the data is first and foremost right there. So, how are you going to manage it? How are you going to collect it? How are you going to interrogate it? How are you going to store it? Just thinking that data strategy all the way through with these solutions is absolutely critical. A clear and compelling business case, right? So it's not just the technology that's easy to become enamored with, and web pages and control rooms and consoles and so forth, but what is that clear and compelling business case, and what are we going to do with this technology, and then how is it going to change and impact the operation? The change journey, I heard Jan make several comments on the change journey. I think we've got a question coming up on that, so maybe I'll save some of my comments there. The fourth one is partners. So who do you need to be on this journey with? And that's both internal and external partners. Internally, our IT organization was clearly a needed partner to be seen that way. And then externally, certainly there are transactional folks, but I'm talking more about the thought leaders out there in this space, in the Internet of Things space, that are going to take you on this journey and can understand your business. And a key one for us in this regard was Honeywell, and I know there's probably a Honeywell, some of the folks sitting out there in the audience, they've been fabulous in really climbing into our problem and talking about how we can take solutions and apply them to what we're attempting to do. So those would be my four.
Yeah, and Tom, what struck me when I listened to your presentation, you had this topology of alerts, alarms, services, but it just sounded like a massive amount of work to think through all the things that could happen and then act upon them. And it doesn't sound like that journey ever ends.
No, it absolutely doesn't. And this is where we tap into the importance of a change journey and bringing people along on that journey, because roles will change. People get, obviously, human nature threatened. Does this mean decision making, to Jeff's point, is going to be consolidated in some control tower? Am I going to, is Big Brother going to be watching and checking whether I'm making proper decisions? So lots of those emotional decisions that absolutely have to be respected, recognized, and jointly worked through. When you're putting in the level of technology and the level of workflow rigor that we really wanted to transform by taking the company on this journey. So it absolutely doesn't end, right? Yeah. It absolutely doesn't end. They continue to think about where they want to extend it, more deeply into the supplier network, more deeply into areas of risk management and our HSSE, health, safety, and environmental performance. I mentioned leak detection earlier. So the journey is far from over. Yeah.
Well, and unfortunately, we're out of time here. But I just want to thank our gentlemen. And I thought this was fantastic content. And I want to send a special thanks to Tom. Tom flew out to Norway shortly before this happened. I wasn't sure Tom was going to make it back, and I'm amazed that he seems awake and alert. And but anyway, let's give our panelists a great hand here.